name is Dewayne Whitehead. I've been teaching for the floors for the last 18 years. Topics having to do with cultural anthropology. I know a lot about sociology, and the sociology of cities and that sort of thing leaves me cold. But cultural anthropology is about people, where they came from, why they went there, and what they have done, how they built civilizations, and problems associated with people at various parts of the world at various times. In anthropological terms, put together, of course, on people, Homo sapiens, and water. How important it is to life, how important it is to where these civilizations arose, always on river basins. The word is everybody's running out of drinking water. Well, when you look at the way fresh water is used, and it's only about 3% of the total water available on Earth, and you consider that half of that is wasted, that conservation is the biggest source of water. And then there are other technologies such as desalination, a number of technologies, and that's getting very cheap. So that you can have desalinated water now with the new technologies for very low cost, although we will start appreciating, respecting water when water costs us some money. When it's free, people waste it. And it's not just Americans, they're doing it all over the world. That when you transport water for long distances, like electricity, up to 50% of it is wasted. Well, if we can recover the wasted water, fresh water, then we just have to worry about different problems, civilization problems of the world. There are different societal problems in getting fresh water to Africans, to some Indians, and to Chinese and so on. And those are societal problems, that the water is there, and we can get cheap water to those people, but that doesn't keep dictators and bad government from keeping people from appreciating such things as water that you can't live without.
Homo sapiens and water. Chapter 3. Qanats.
Afghanistan, difficult land, lots of mountains, they got lots of snow, which melts, and most of it runs off by way of a few rivers or sinks into the desert like sands. About 3,000 years ago, it was part of the Persian Empire. And the Persians brought their water management system as well as their road building and orderly government. Alexander the Great conquered the Persian Empire, as you know, and he left his footprint there because when he and his army moved south along the Indus River, he left soldiers and garrisons, officers and a garrison of men throughout Afghanistan. And the footprints are still there through DNA from these soldiers. There are still blonde, blue-eyed, Greek-looking people who live there in central and northern Afghanistan. So they brought Qanat technology, the Persians did, and the Greeks absorbed all of that as well. They're called Qanats in Afghan. It is straightforward in a country like this where water comes down from the snow peaks and sometimes saturates the alluvial till at the mountain base. Men started digging horizontally at the place where they wanted water, making a tunnel wide enough to work in and tall enough to stand in. The spoil was removed by upright shafts 30 to 50 meters apart with a pulley like this. These were either at the top or on a shelf if it was a very long upright tunnel. And this is how they, with leather bags filled with the stone and dirt, this is in the museum in Kabul. That's a painting of the mountains behind it. Looking at solid rock, the way they worked in most of this, that's what they were facing. They had to dig horizontally. You see there's the path in the dotted lines front and back. That's the channel. The water would have been 3 to 4 feet deep and maybe 3 to 5 feet wide. And cut out of that rock, and there's the upright channel all the way to the top. I like that picture. It tells a lot. Because this is all done by hand. What I mentioned before, that you talk about what people do by hand. The Great Walls of China were done by hand. And they dug all that dirt and carried it in baskets, woven baskets. Sometimes two on a back, on a pole. And then they pounded Earth's technology and built the Great Walls of China. Men did that. Hundreds of thousands of them died. A lot died digging these tunnels too. It was dangerous work. That's a painting to show you the idea of multiple Qanats coming out of a alluvial till, if not a fan, and going to an area that would be as wide as a city. The streets of the city would parallel those Qanats, and the houses would be built along that pattern. So Qanats and this type of thing set the form of city building throughout the Persian Empire. And it's still visible in places like Afghanistan. Here the water is out of the Qanat and into open irrigation ditches. Note the island oasis concept of green in a gray valley. Beyond those trees, it's very gray. This is where nothing will grow unless you put the water there. Is that beautiful or what? Look how straight the boundaries are, because that's the limit of the irrigation ditches. None of that would be green if it weren't for the irrigation. All brought there by Qanats. There are sandstone mountains, because these mountains also have eroded and more mountains come up and so on. And so the sand that was there gets compressed under the great weight of mountain building and forms sandstone, and sometimes those are dissolved with an underground flow of water. And the more soluble the rock is, the bigger the caverns. So we know the history of caverns in Spain, the Apennines, and in the U.S. as well. And so they use these cavities to catch rain. There's probably already water in them, and so the water is relatively pure. If it lacks contamination, as it would the closer to the mountains, you could use it as drinking water, and they have done that. The Taliban is said to have some of these caves with water in them, but dry areas as well. So part of their hiding routine in the mountains in Afghanistan. They may be open to the sky, they may not be, but part of modern water management is to have a flow of rainwater. How do you capture rainwater? We'll talk about this on the last lecture and so on, but management of rainwater in India and some places in Southeast Asia, the whole village will have a network of roofs, gutters that catch the runoff from the roofs. So when pure rainwater falls in the monsoons, you get it into cisterns. And the cisterns are rock or cement lined and so on. And that is captured rainwater, which would otherwise flow off to the ocean. And that has become an important approach in the last 20, 30 years in India, Pakistan. At the end of the flow, if there are no more houses, no more reason to have drinking water out of this Qanat, it can go to agricultural use. And keep in mind this is cold, but as far as I know, they did not put heaters in the cold water like we do at the Essex condominium across the street. I go in most mornings to 85 degrees for the pool and 104 for the jacuzzi. It's estimated there were more than 20,000 Qanats fully operable before the Russians came in 1976. Recently, U.S. troops destroyed several unseen Qanats while expanding the airfield, and they got in just as much trouble doing that as they did on urinating on corpses of Taliban and all the other wonderful things our kids did there. So, Iraq. Most irrigation in Iraq is by open ditch, as it has been for millennia, resulting in heavy salt accumulation, putting much needed arable land out of production. After the First World War, when Turkey lost out and you dissolved the Ottoman Empire, for the previous 100 years, the Ottoman Empire had been going to pot anyway, and all the wonderful irrigation systems that they had sponsored by the government, enforced by the government, they had filled it up. But also, the land had been flood irrigated for so long that many of the fields were crusted with salt. Now, there is a technique for washing that out, but you need a lot of pure clean water to do it. You have to have something like a dam and release a flow of water that will essentially be directed to flood across the field. And you may have to do it more than once. Of course, you will take some dirt with it, but you have to soften the salt, and then you have to be softened and then washed away with another flood. Not many people today have water they want to do that kind of washing of the soil with. So, much of this tillable land in Iraq, and increasingly so in Syria as well, where they do a lot of open trench irrigation, it's crusted with salt, as is the old wheat basket of Egypt, below the Aswan Dam, out to the sea and so on. That was the bread basket of Rome, until they got so big they needed to tap the Black Sea, the Ukrainian fields. That is now almost unusable because of the salt. The Aswan Dam is also putting hydraulic pressure on the water flow, so it's bringing salt up from underneath. So not only do you have the flood irrigation crusting the top, but the salt is coming up from underneath. There is salt in the water, maybe 1% in all these rivers. They all flow in. Just as you get agricultural chemical contamination, you're also getting salt. So in a wet week, you salt all the salt in the fields around here that runs off into the river and so on. And that salt is then used, it's put into the dam, and then let flow into the irrigation canals and so on, and salt, it's very slightly salty water. How long will it take to make a field unusable? Maybe 6 years, maybe 20 years. The point is they've been doing it for hundreds of years, and so now much of the land is unusable. And that's happening in the southwest too. There's salt contamination in Texas. The 2009 study of Qanats by UNESCO in the Kurdistan region, of 983 Qanat systems, 380 were still active. I have the years wrong. Anyway, you get the idea. And only 2 years later, 116 were. You see how quickly they're being discarded. Why? Because it's a lot easier to go buy a pump and plug it in or feed it diesel fuel than to go clean out a Qanat. So that's what's happening. Happening in Syria, happening in Afghanistan. And then when you start pumping, you lower the whole water table, so the Qanats won't flow anyway. So like the guy in The Economist talked about the Qanat in his backyard that had been there in his family for generations, suddenly went dry. The reasons for the sudden decline are abandonment and neglect, excessive pumping of groundwater, and drought. Drought will affect wells, but keep in mind Qanats have a secure source. And some of these have run through drought and plenty for 2,000–3,000 years. But if you destroy that system, you are now settling for a vulnerable system that's depending on the fossil water in the aquifer, which people are pumping dry. That is the arable land in Syria. You see, there isn't much. The bulk of Syria, they don't grow anything on. The Euphrates comes in from Turkey up there and comes into the northern quarter of the country. And so the Turks are building dams on the river above the border. And the Syrians want to build one below the border. And you see where the Euphrates goes, it goes to Iraq. So what's going to be left to rebuild those marshes that Saddam Hussein destroyed? It'll be a very slow thing with the water being cut off by Turkey and now the UN is very concerned about this and taking some action. The trouble is, it's tough to impose sanctions on a friendly government with all the turmoil in the Middle East right now. I mean, do you really want to put sanctions on Turkey now because they are denying Syria of water?
Can't
win. They're not giving Turkey poison to put in the water that goes to Syria. Syria is prosperous, has a pretty good economy. And so they invested heavily in these masonry. One that used to flow down the ditch is now in a concrete basin. They are open. And interestingly enough, what that guy has in his hand is a siphon. But you immerse the whole tube in the water and then bring the end up over, and water flows out of the long trough into an irrigation ditch. And you can reduce the flow from the flooding flow to maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches according to the thickness of that plastic pipe he has in his hand. Those are permanent concrete irrigation channels. Syria has invested a lot of money in this irrigation system. And that's the depth of the flow. I mean, you're talking about a lot of acre feet of water. Where the green is where they are,
That's where this is?
where they have the water, so they are piping it. The river runs through, and the broad green area is due to this sort of thing. I don't know of anybody that's doing it anywhere. They didn't do it in Cambodia either. Those were open trenches. It probably is not leaked water because they're sensitive to this idea that 20% of all transfer of water systems leak 20% to a third of the water that they carry. It leaks out and goes into the ground, wasted. So this makes sure that you may lose it by evaporation, but you're not losing it by leaks. That's where the bulk of the Qanats are. So you can see that the rivers are over here. The mountains are far north. So they have underground stone Qanats, stone or terracotta pipe, flowing to all those areas. Probably at least half the surface area of Syria was serviced by Qanats before maybe 20 years ago. This is a large concrete channel, and these are siphons. So the water is flowing over here into irrigation, and then to move it, they can just slide it down or pull it out and immerse it later on and start a new siphon. They want enough flow here that they have two running side by side. And we talked before about the efficiency of it. The Syrians have been very, very good at keeping up with technology. So this is a solar system to run a pump. Ordinarily, you would use a diesel pump or electric pump for water, but they are using solar power. So heavy pumping of groundwater has caused more than half the Qanats to stop running after 1,000 years. That, by the way, that's all in the last 20 years, according to the economy. Turkey. This Turkish dam on the Euphrates River is an international cause célèbre for depriving Syria and Iraq of their international water rights. The UN had proposed sanctions, but with the current trouble cropping up in the last 5 years, they're soft pedaling. The point is that they are planning, there are 1,700 dams. Every river in Turkey has been dammed several times. This is on the Euphrates. They're also planning to dam the Tigris. Who can enforce international water rights? In America, we can't enforce them because the powerful people control the states, counties, and everything. We have no control at all. That's why that list of Frank is kind of a joke. Because people were people, greedy, powerful. If you have to deny your neighbor, fine, as long as my gain is sufficient.
Is there something like a UN commission?
Yes, yes. Not doing a damn thing. They say they've been sitting idle. They don't dare impose sanctions on Turkey. They need Turkey now. Another of 1,700 dams in Turkey. You have to consider the space it takes to build a dam. Now these people have lived along the riverbanks, and they have developed their own irrigation system, farms or whatever, even if they carry water in buckets. But you consider the amount of space that is required to build a dam, cut back into the banks and build the support and so on, and then the lake, it backs up over an area so that in China something like 3 million people were displaced by the Three Gorges Dam, and in this hundreds of thousands of people, and the government never ever ever asked, can we help? These people lost their land, they weren't compensated, they weren't given another place to live. Many of them are minorities, like Kurds. Hey, maybe the Kurds will go to Iraq. Turkish dams don't just affect Kurds. They cover all, they cut off access to water in Iraq and Syria as well, forcing entire populations in those countries to resettle. This is a perfect example of a country having control of the water source and disregarding or minimizing the rights of those downstream, like Egypt is trying to do in the Nile, like China is trying to do on the Mekong. Other examples. Israel holds the Golan Heights. Why? That's where the Jordan River starts. You're not going to let the Syrians control that. They'll never get the Golan Heights back. It's discussed in the press as if it were just a political issue. it goes way to hell beyond politics. This water is survival for Israel, and they will do anything to keep the water. And they're never, ever, ever going to get back to Golden Heights. Of course, they depleted the Jordan. They use every bit of water out of the Jordan, so none of it gets to the Dead Sea. But they have a dream of piping salt water from the Red Sea to the Dead Sea and reflooding it, bringing the water table back up in the deepest depression in the world, so that they can revive industries that made a business out of refining various chemicals out of the Dead Sea water. Well, it's terribly concentrated now, but you see pumping water in from the ocean. Why they don't do the Mediterranean, I don't know, but there was a reason given in what I read, but they're talking about from the Red Sea. It is much further, but probably another 100 miles. And pumping ocean water into that would dilute the salinity back to where it used to be. It was still the most salty water in the world. Israel controls the West Bank because that's where the aquifers are. Why do you think they're building settlements on those hills? Because they're right over the aquifer. They're never going to get a peace settlement. They would lose control of the primary main source of fresh water outside the Jordan. Already desalinating because their population is growing so much. They will never give that up. I predict. If I'm wrong, don't tell me. Turkey has been booming in the past decades. Dams supply hydroelectric power, and plans are to double the present number, 1,700, double the number in the next decade. But at what cost? The millions of displaced people are, quote, only marginal source like Kurds and the poor Alevi. Euphrates water in Turkey that will never get down. This is an irrigation canal tapping the Euphrates River. So this is not a river. This is irrigation water tapped from the river going out to irrigate land in Turkey. So those marshes in southern Iraq that we saw so much of it when we had a course on language will be a long time filling up with water. The UN is trying without much success. They pushed an international outcry about building a dam in northern Turkey because of, quote, the extremely high environmental social costs, and they stopped that particular dam being built in less sensitive times, like 20 years ago. No plans were ever made to relocate the hundreds of thousands the construction and resulting lake would displace. The proposed Elisu Dam on the Tigris would force the resettlement of 58,000 to 70,000 people with no plan on how to do it. The UN report calls this, quote, utterly disturbing. The UN may lay sanctions on Turkey, but now is probably not the best time to stir up more turmoil. Pivot irrigation in Turkey. Remember we had a picture like this in Kansas, and one in West Texas, and one in Nebraska. Pivot irrigation has been the beginning of the decline due to overuse of pumped water from the aquifers. This is not what you would call good agricultural land in Jordan. Jordan really has no good agricultural land. Flood irrigation. It can only produce crops with irrigation, and 50% is lost to evaporation in open trench flood irrigation. The trouble is, the irrigation canals like this one are bringing salty waters from the rivers to fields already encrusted with salt from centuries of flood irrigation. Peoples everywhere are making the desert bloom. In Israel, the Negev. In Arizona and West Texas. In the heartland of Australia. In Saudi Arabia. So why not Jordan? All you do is add water. And where do you get the water? Pump it out of the aquifer. It's free and finite. There are 4 main oases in the Egyptian desert. The Karga oasis is one of them, and has been extensively studied. Since the 5th century, the area has been supplied with water by way of Qanats. The Qanat is excavated through water-bearing sandstone rock, which seeps into the channel to collect in a basin behind the small dam. The sandstone is porous enough that groundwater outside the sandstone or saturating the sandstone causes the walls to weep and actually make a small trickle or flow of water along the walls down into the bottom, in which case it goes to a pool to go out to the outside. And when the drought conditions in the last, 20 years or so, caused the flow to decline, they cut side channels in this underground channel. So you had maybe a 20-foot room going out this way, 20 from this way, and the sweating walls then contributed to the whole and restored the original flow to the oasis. The width is 60 centimeters and at height is 5 to 9 centimeters because it has been deepened to keep up with the declining water table. From the pool, water went out in zone channels to irrigate fields. As water tables dropped, side channels were dug, as I told you. This is the oasis and temple complex. Several thousand people have been getting their water from a Qanats system from these mountains for about 2,000 years. This pond is one in town. All the water is supplied by Qanats. Interesting that in 1650 to 1550 BC, there was a settlement here. And they also got water, probably by Qanats. And this is remains of a pool that they have excavated, so they brought water there in sufficient quantity to have a pool reservoir. All this was started with water from the Qanats, as I showed you in the other slide, and now it's assisted with water from a deep well. And you see it running up the 6-inch wells in Nebraska that ran night and day for 30 years until the water table went down. And there's another one of those pulley things. This is modern day Morocco. Oases of Drava and Tafilat have relied on Qanats, they call it Qataras locally, for water since the 14th century. Further north in Marrakesh, the Qanats have dried up due to excessive pumping. Same problem everywhere. Morocco, it was built by Almohad ruler Abd al-Mumin in the 12th century, and is surrounded by rich oases of orchards, olive groves, and gardens. Water is brought from the Atlas Mountains, you see in the background there. How many people have been to Marrakesh? Yeah. Have you been to this? My wife and I were there, and we didn't see it either. The mountains are 30 miles to the east, and the same Qanat has been doing this since the 14th century. That kind of a lake is supplied with that Qanat from snowmelt from the Atlas Mountains. And that kind of water gardens, fountains, and so on, all supplied by Qanat. And next week we'll do the Asians.